With Season 2 of The Witcher coming out soon, I thought this would be a good time to discuss weapons, methods in general for monster hunting. Would a silver sword really be the weapon of choice? Like, share and subscribe, and let's discuss this. Before we get to the weapons itself, I want to discuss the type of monsters that a monster hunter, a monster slayer would be facing. These kinds of stories usually start with something relatively mundane, maybe wild dogs, mutant wolves, undead, draugr, humanoid monsters that may be a bit tougher than animals and humans, maybe a bit stronger, different senses, but by and large these creatures will be very similar to their real-world counterparts. Meaning you can fight them like their real-world counterparts. So usually slash them, stab them, shoot them with an arrow or crossbow bolt, and they will die. But then you will also fight more monstrous creatures, like ghouls, werewolves, maybe even giant abominations that weigh as much as an elephant, and creatures that are so superhumanly strong they can rip apart the monster hunter like a ragdoll. Fighting these monstrous creatures, or fighting creatures with supernatural powers and resistances and abilities, that is when you really need to go into the specialized monster hunting weapons. So let's get started on the actual weapons. Sword. A long sword, such as this, is a very versatile weapon. It's fast in the hand, relatively easy to transport, and you can carve all kind of fancy magical runes into it. It's generally good for cutting, slashing your opponents, also thrusting. You can even go half swording and really get into the gaps in a monster's armor if the need arises. Or if you need something a bit more blunt force and brutal, you can murder strike. So when fighting humanoid creatures or something of dog size, a long sword will do you just fine. But it will get to the limits of its abilities if you are fighting anything larger. Anything that will not die from a dedicated sword thrust, or that has a hide so tough you can't really cut it with a sword anymore. Anything that is armored like an insect creature, like a Kikimura from The Witcher. Anything that is very large and strong will bring a sword to its limit. Imagine something the size of a bear, like a bear charging at you. You could try to run it through with your sword, but in doing so you may kill the bear, but the bear still slams into you and crushes you to paste on its weight. So your only option in these cases becomes to avoid the monster's attacks and then strike. And it's much easier. It's much easier to avoid an attack if you are further away from it. And this is where a spear comes in handy. There's a good reason that a spear has been a traditional hunting weapon for millennia. Since we first learned how to sharpen a stick, the spear has been the weapon of choice to bring down larger prey. Thrusts will have a better chance to get through the thick hide of a monster, and you can still do these precise thrusts to get through gaps in enemy armor. Really, the main advantage is its reach. You are further away from the threat, and that means any attack against you will have to be more dedicated, further reaching, and probably slower, and you see it coming from further away, meaning you have more time to dodge. If the monster is not super humongously strong and large, and you have a sufficiently strong spear, you could stand your ground and let it run into your spear, impaling itself, and still get away. Mind you, you would need something that is a bit larger and sturdier than this. There has been spears like that, dedicated pig hawk hunting spears, thick shafts, long, and they would have blades on either side, or at least a cross guard to keep the spear from penetrating too deeply into the target, so you can get it out again, and so that there's no chance of the target sliding along the length of the spear and coming into reach to attack you. Another advantage of a weapon like a spear or an axe is that you need relatively little metal compared to a full-length sword. Meaning, if you need to put precious metals like silver onto your blade, this will run you a lot cheaper, and you still have enough space to put some fancy magical runes into it. Now, if you go into heavy spear territory, you might at one point end up with a huge selection of medieval pole arms, like for example a halberd. Halberd is a very versatile weapon. It's combining the strengths of spear, mainly the reach, and the thrusting potential, with a lot of cutting and hacking power. Usually on the backside you have either a spike or something like a hammerhead, which enables you to really engage something armored. And these hooks you find everywhere on a polearm such as these enable you to hook your enemy and then hinder its movements, keep it down on the ground. Now, that is not a huge advantage when you are fighting on your own, but when you are fighting in a group and the first man manages to bind an enemy's legs, to bind a monster's legs, then the other ones can rush in, bind the other legs and keep it down and immobilize it. So one of them will be able to deal a killing blow. So something like a halberd, a winged spear, a bill hook, basically a polearm infantry weapon, is a good choice if you're fighting in a group, certainly. But when we are talking about reach and hunting weapons, there is a whole category of weapons which much greater reach and utility in hunting. Ranged weapons, starting with throwing rocks. Not very effective against a monster unless it's a magical rock. Throwing spears. You can bring a mammoth down with enough throwing spears. And then of course bow and arrow or crossbow. A bow and arrow gives you the ability to kill and engage the monster at a safe distance where it is unable to attack you. There are almost no animals that have an actual ranged attack. So the ability to engage your target tens or even 100 steps away, the ability to engage from an advantageous position, like from the top of a hill, from the top of a tree, from the top of a wall, is a huge advantage in any hunting situation. Now in fantasy, many monsters are really resistant to mundane attacks such as arrows, but compared to a close combat weapon like a sword or a spear, a powerful bow will be able to penetrate similar thick hides and armor and deal grievous penetrating wounds. You can imagine if the monster is only vulnerable by a certain metal, you only need a tiny little bit of it to put into the tip of your arrows. So I think for most monsters, the best weapon would actually be a ranged weapon, a bow and arrow, or if you're more into trapping and preparing and you're fighting in groups, maybe a very heavy crossbow, like a huge windlass crossbow, will penetrate even the thickest of hides. And that comes to my next point: traps and preparation. A good hunter will not just run in sword swinging, trying to kill its foe. No, a good hunter gets to know his prey, what it eats, where it sleeps, how you can trap it, what bait to use. A professional monster hunter wants to minimize his risk of injury and death would probably prepare ahead of time, so he doesn't actually have to fight fairly. How about use of poison? If you know where your monster is, lay out a few pieces of poisoned bait. Then when the monster is weakened or even killed from the poison, you can hack off its head and collect the bounty. Or if it's only weakened, then at least the fight is easier. Maybe it's slower, it's weaker, so it's easier to hit with your bow or your sword or spear. And you could use other traps, like a huge bear trap or a spiked pit trap or even a non-spiked pit trap. Those will not necessarily, most often not, kill your prey outright, but they will seriously impair the prey's movement. If it is stuck in a bear trap, if it is stuck down in a pit, it becomes much easier to shoot it from above or step with your spear. So traps are a huge benefit to a monster hunter. Lastly, hunting dogs. Humans have been hunting together with dogs also for millennia, and there are many specialized breeds of hunting dogs. Some of them very small to go into a fox den, some of them very large to chase down and bring down larger prey. Hunting dogs are also a huge asset in actually finding your prey. A dog's ability to smell is several thousand times better, stronger than that of a human. So even if you're a superhuman mutant and you have a nose that is 10 times better, 100 times better, a dog is still better by a factor of 10 or 100. So if you find a track of your prey monster, if you find a few hairs from its coat, then you can give that your hunting dog to sniff, and he can start tracking your prey, making your work a lot easier. Dogs have also tremendously good hearing, not only much more acute than humans, but they're also able to hear frequencies we can't, giving you more potential to just hear the monster and to warn you if you are to run into an enemy ambush, into the monsters then unprepared. If the monsters come to your campsite at night, the dogs will warn you. Now, in many fantasy settings, animals such as dogs are afraid of supernatural threats and will just tuck their tails between their legs and whimper away. But I think if you've got professional monster hunters that have been doing this kind of hunting for hundreds or even thousands of years, there's more than enough time to breed special monster hunting dogs that are not afraid of these supernatural threats, that might be even hyper aware of magic, might be resistant to it even. And those would not tuck their tails and whimper away. Those would stand their ground. Those would attack. Those would bite into the arms and legs of your foe and bring him down for you to deal the final killing blow. It's not like you are limited to just one dog. Dogs are pack animals. You could bring 2, 3, 6, a dozen hunting dogs, depending on how big your game is, how big a monster you are hunting. A motivated pack of wolves can bring down a moose, and mooses are just ginormous. So if you've got specially bred monster hunting dogs, they will be able to track and bring down even the large prey, the werewolves, the ghouls, the elephant-sized creatures. And even if they are not able to outright kill it, they are a good distraction and are seriously hindering your target's movement, making it way easier to get your arrows out, your silver poison-tipped arrows, and deal the killing blow. And then at the end maybe get in close with your sword, spear, just finish off your helpless prey. Now, if you're hunting something like a werewolf, many of your hunting dogs will probably die in the attack. But I think for a professional monster hunter, that is a worthy trade-off. You can always breed and train more dogs. Raising and training a new monster hunter will take about, say, 10 years. And if you're using mutants, magical enhanced humans like in The Witcher, many of your recruits won't make it. So these monster hunters are a huge investment in both time and resources. But your dogs, they basically breed on their own, and they are fully grown and trained within a few years. It's much preferable for the professional hunter to lose a few of the hunting dogs rather than risk losing the hunter. So, in the end, what is the best monster hunting weapon? And I would say, why decide? Why not use all of them? Know your prey, stalk it, set traps and poison, chase it down with your dogs, shoot it with crossbow bolts and arrows, stab them with spears, bring them down, and have a silver sword for backup in case your spear breaks. What do you think? Any weapons I've completely forgotten? Any other hunting methods I'm not aware of? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.